Hi everybody, it's Lisa here from Holistic Health by Lisa Moan for my regular Monday night Facebook Live. And tonight we're going to be talking about sleep and how nutritionists can help with sleep, lots of the issues that people come to see me with sleep, and what we can do to help your child get to sleep at night. Before we get started on that, I'll just let you know that next week we're going to be talking about ADHD and the impact of food on ADHD and ADHD-like behaviours. So if you have a child with ADHD, maybe you have medicated, maybe you haven't, you might like to join me next week for that. So sleep, you really don't have any idea of how valuable sleep is until you have kids and sleep is suddenly taken away from you. So everybody works better on a good night's sleep. Adults do, and kids definitely do. So speaking of ADHD, lots of kids that actually get diagnosed with ADHD are actually just really, really tired, because when kids get tired, they don't get lethargic like adults. They actually can get quite hyperactive, like they're trying to keep themselves awake. So if your child does have ADHD, this is going to be very interesting to you, because if you can actually tackle your child's sleep issues, then some of the behavioural concerns will also fall into line. And if you do have any questions as we go along, please feel free to type them in and I'll try and answer them as we go. So if you've had a child with some sleep issues, you might have invested in a sleep trainer. So a super nanny type of person who comes to your house and helps with sleep and routine. And that might work for some children, especially babies, if they just need a bit of routine and a bit of structure. But if there's actually something biochemically going on with them, then that's not going to help, because it's not that the child doesn't want to go to sleep, it's that they can't actually get to sleep. So if you've tried the sleep training and it hasn't worked, then this is going to be very interesting for you. And then sometimes the next thing people do is a sleep study, which is fascinating to know, the architecture of your child's sleep and what is happening. But in my experience, people get handed a report about the results of their sleep study, and other than prescribing melatonin, there doesn't seem to be a lot of other things that can be done to manage that, or maybe recommend taking your tonsils out, but it tells you what you probably suspect anyway. So again, it might not be helpful. Whereas what we really want to do is get to the root cause of your child's sleep issues and find out why they're having a bad night's sleep. So why is sleep so important, other than stopping people getting cranky during the day? So it's actually, your body goes through a restoration process and a healing process every night. So it needs that time to kind of clean up the brain and do all the housekeeping in your brain. So that's what your body is doing during those 8 to 10 to 12 hours. Also, things like metabolism and detoxification are all managed by going to sleep. So sleep helps to regulate these processes, which is why you see people who do shift work might have issues with their metabolism and might put on weight, because the sleep that they need to regulate their metabolism isn't happening in sufficient quality or quantity. And then detoxification. So everybody needs to detoxify. You don't have to be drinking a bottle of wine every night. Even kids need to detoxify, and that happens when they're asleep. Our immune system is really topped up in our sleep. So again, a child that's not getting sufficient sleep might be more susceptible to getting all the coughs and colds and gastro bugs that are going around. Children actually grow in their sleep. So if your child is a bit shorter than perhaps you would have expected them to be, and they're not sleeping well, then if you address their sleep, then they might grow a bit more. And everything that you learn during the day gets consolidated in your sleep. So in terms of doing well at school and being able to consolidate the learning from school, a lot of that happens in your sleep. So lots of good reasons why you should prioritize sleep and really work on it if you're having some issues with it. So with babies, starting there, why you might have trouble with your baby getting to sleep. And certainly there are a lot of behavioural things going on at this stage, especially with a first child, when obviously nobody has a clue what they're doing. So if you're having sleep issues with your first child, you might benefit from a Trazilian sort of situation to help with the structure and the routine. But other than that, your child could actually have some nutritional deficiencies. So especially if they were a preemie, and that could affect them, and they could be deficient in things like magnesium, which is very calming and helpful for sleep, or zinc, which you need to make neurotransmitters to help you sleep. And with a baby that's not on solids, you don't want to give them any supplements whatsoever. So for a young breastfed baby who shouldn't be sleeping through the night anyway, so it's kind of irrelevant. But if you do want to top up their nutrients because they were preemie, just take a really good prenatal supplement yourself as the breastfeeding mum, and then that will go in to the baby. Babies could have some food sensitivities. So they might be sensitive to, say, for instance, onion. And if you're eating a lot of onion, that's going to cause their tummy to be upset, and it's going to break up their sleep. Then with older children, they can have too much sugar in their diet, even if they're just eating too much fruit. So lots of, mango, pineapple, those high sugar fruits. If they could be exposed to cigarette smoke, and that could impact them. And they could just have some issues with their gut health for some reasons. Maybe it's been passed down from mum, maybe they had a cesarean birth instead of a vaginal birth, or maybe they were bottle fed instead of breastfed. So all of these things will impact their gut health and could be impacting their sleep. And then, so with older children, that's kind of the baby phase. And then with older children, the issues that people come to see me about with older children is, first one is bedwetting. And again, up until about the age of 7, it's not ideal, but it's not outlandish for a child to be wetting the bed. But once they're past about 7 and they're still wetting the bed, then it is definitely time to take action. And you can do that down the medical route and make sure there's nothing structurally going on. But you can also look at their food and their nutrition and see if there's anything going on there. So a big one with bedwetting is actually food allergy or food intolerances, because that creates just an underlying sort of irritation to the body and to the bladder, and so you go to the toilet in your sleep. Other things that can affect bedwetting is constipation. So if your child is chronically constipated, that will affect their bladder because it's all in the same area, and all the extra poo will push on the bladder, and that can cause them to wet the bed. And then other things like anxiety, which again can be attributed a lot to gut health and neurotransmitters in your brain, or urinary tract infections. So all of these things can be helped by food and nutrients. Certainly constipation is obvious that there's big dietary things that you can do to make sure your child's doing a good poo every day. Then another problem is teeth grinding, so bruxism. And as I've mentioned before in other Facebook Lives, this can be due to worms or other parasites, but good old threadworms can cause children to grind their teeth in the night, just because, again, it's just really irritating because the little worms come out to play at night, and your dentist might notice that either the teeth are cracked or they're getting ground down. So then, the quickest thing to do there is just to worm your child if you think that they have worms, or if you can see that they have worms. But if they're getting the recurrent worms, go back and look at my Facebook Live from a few weeks ago about worms, but all the other strategies you can use for that. Then there's nightmares and night terrors. So they're a bit different. Nightmares are fairly common, and they'll happen in the second half of the night. So the child will have a really bad dream and will possibly wake up crying and come into bed with you and then go back to sleep. So again, it can be anxiety driven, which you can impact by, gut health, neurotransmitters. But then there's night terrors, which are different and a lot more disturbing, let's say. So that's where your child gets into bed and then a couple of hours later will start to scream or walk around the place, and they have no idea. They're not conscious, they're just screaming in their sleep, and they're pretty much inconsolable. And that that can show that your child needs a little bit of liver detoxification. So perhaps they've had more medications than they should have, or maybe their little livers are just not processing things as well as they should have. So you can do really gentle things like dandelion tea is a great easy place to start, and just give them a cup of dandelion tea every day, and just tell them it's their hot chocolate or something and that will help with their liver. Another frequent issue is the obstructive sleep apnea, which is usually, when I see it, it's usually because their tonsils are enlarged. So obviously it can just be because the child is a little bit overweight and that's putting pressure, but often it's their tonsils, which can definitely be a food intolerance thing as well. And that's why their tonsils are permanently enlarged. And then there's restless legs, which is where the child's just playing soccer all night long. You'll notice that if you co-sleep with your child and they're just kicking, moving all night long, and that can be an iron deficiency. So that's something that a GP will be aware of and will be happy to check. If you say that your child has restless legs, they will check their iron, and then you can supplement with iron, but you really need to understand why is your child deficient in iron, because you don't want to supplement with something just without knowing the root cause. So if they're not eating red meat, well then that's why they're deficient. But if they are eating red meat like 3 times a week and they're still deficient, you really need to find out why. And that's the sort of thing that I can help with. So I've talked a lot about neurotransmitters because they're very important with the anxiety, which can be causing sleep issues. But then with actually getting to sleep, neurotransmitters are really important. And so you might have heard of melatonin, and certainly if you've been to see a sleep specialist, they may have even prescribed melatonin to your child at a low dose, which is okay in the short term. But what you want to do is use the minimum dose of melatonin, and as soon as your child has established a good circadian rhythm and is going to sleep at an appropriate time and getting up at an appropriate time, you want to cut back the melatonin, because there's no long-term studies to say that it's safe for use with children, even though it is good and it does work for a lot of kids. So you really want to facilitate your child's own production of serotonin and melatonin to help them sleep. And to do that, you need tryptophan, but you also need the cofactors to make all the neurotransmitters. So all that gets very complicated. And a great thing to do is to do an organic acid test. So that's a urine test that your child can do, and it looks at all the neurotransmitters, and it helps you know for sure why they're not sleeping. And so this test, I use it with my child, my middle child, because she really struggled to sleep for quite a few years. And we did the organic acid test, and it showed that she wasn't converting tryptophan to melatonin. So when now she started to take tryptophan before bed, so sort of instead of just relying on the tryptophan from food, she takes extra tryptophan with all the cofactors that she needs to make melatonin, and that really helped her fall asleep, which was life-changing and amazing. So now we'll just talk about some foods that will actually help with sleep. So walnuts are great because they actually contain tryptophan, which, as I mentioned, your body needs to make melatonin and serotonin. So a few walnuts, for supper, or a few almonds are good as well, because almonds contain lots of magnesium and calcium, which are both very calming and help kids relax and help kids fall asleep. So they're easy enough to get into your child. Just give them, they don't need tons of them, just give them a small handful every day. And then good old green leafy vegetables, they're good for everything, aren't they? So they'll help with the detoxification, which I mentioned for the night terrors, but they're also got lots of calcium and magnesium as well, which again are going to help your child to make melatonin and fall asleep. Seafood, I always found when my kids were babies, when they had salmon, they slept so much better that night. So again, really good source of protein, a really good source of tryptophan, so it's going to help with sleep. And a sort of easy-ish thing to get into your child as well is tart cherries. And you can buy tart cherry juice in the health food store. And, you know, as it's called, tart cherry juice, it is quite sour. So most kids probably won't just drink it directly, but you can make it into jellies or ice blocks or something like that. And that contains melatonin, so that works really, really well to help kids get into the right circadian rhythm. And then another old wives' trick is a boiled egg, which helps with sleep. I don't know if it's just because of the protein or there's some other reason, but a boiled egg at bedtime is great for getting to sleep, which I couldn't use for the daughter who had sleep issues because she was anaphylactic to egg. So that I never actually got to try that one. And then there's foods that you should definitely not be having near bedtime. And the first thing is caffeine. So naturally you're not giving your kids coffee and expecting them to sleep, but are you giving them a Freddo for dessert or some chocolate ice cream or some nice homemade cacao brownies? Because they all contain caffeine, and in a sensitive child, that's going to affect their sleep. So switch out the Freddo, switch in the boiled egg. Another obvious big no-no is the ice cream after bed, because it's full of sugar, and that sugar is going to wind up the child and stop them being able to sleep at night. So I hope you found all that interesting. So in terms of what to do, if you think that your child has a few symptoms that suggest they have a neurotransmitter imbalance, so maybe they've got some anxiety and they're not sleeping and some other behavioural concerns, it is well worthwhile doing something like the organic acid test and being able to pinpoint exactly what is out of balance, and then you can address it. If your child's wetting the bed, then you could do a food allergy test and see if there's some foods that are irritating them. If your child's grinding their teeth, then check them for worms and then go back and watch my other Facebook Live about worms if you think that's a problem. And yes, if your child has enlarged tonsils which are affecting their sleep, consider doing an allergy test. And all of this will only work if good sleep hygiene is in place. So I have lots of stuff about sleep hygiene on my website, but basically it means that with children you need to have a routine before bedtime, no devices for 2 hours before bedtime, have the lights off in their bedroom, deal with their fear of the dark and make sure the lights are off. So all those sorts of things, lots of information on my website. So if you've got any questions at all, just pop them below. I'd love to answer them. Or if you've got any requests for future Facebook Lives as well, just feel free to message me or post below. And next week we'll be talking about ADHD and how to manage some of your child's symptoms through foods and nutrients. And yeah, so I'll see you next Monday night at 7:30. Talk to you then. Thank you.